Hello everyone, I am JG and welcome back to Music Forever, where today I'm going to be doing a new list video for you guys where I'm going to be ranking the studio albums from the Gorillaz, one of my favorite bands. So today I wanted to share with you the list of their albums from least favorite to favorite in my own opinion. I do want to make it clear that this list is strictly my own opinion. I'm not saying that this is in order from objective worst to best, or like least influential to most influential album, or least important to most important to Gorillaz' career, or something like that. This is strictly from the album that I enjoy the least from the Gorillaz up to the one I enjoy the most from them, where I'm going to be explaining why exactly that is. Another thing I want to clarify is that the only albums you're going to be seeing here on this list today are the studio albums from the Gorillaz. I know they have several remix albums as well as other things just like loose singles or live albums, and stuff like that isn't going to be here on this list. Not necessarily that it's bad or anything like that, but comparing those things to the studio albums is a bit difficult to do, so I'm just sticking to the studio albums here today. And if you're curious to know which albums those are, watch the rest of the video. The ones I include here on the list, those are the ones that count pretty much. But yeah, with that said, let's get into my least favorite Gorillaz album. To begin, my least favorite Gorillaz album is The Fall. This tends to be universally regarded as Gorillaz' worst album, and while I don't think it's necessarily a bad album, I don't think it's a very good album either. I think it's pretty average overall. Don't get me wrong, there are highlights on this thing like Revolving Doors for example, but so much of this album just feels like fluff to me. Whereas most Gorillaz projects feature a wide array of sounds being explored, The Fall goes for this very minimalistic sound that results from the project being recorded on an iPad while touring for Plastic Beach, which had only been released a couple months prior to this project. In some ways, it feels like a 2D solo project, because I believe that he alone could be capable of making this whole album. I'm not trying to say that 2D could only make an album of this quality if he, wanted to. I mean, he's a fictional character, but, hypothetically speaking, that is. I'm just saying, really, that it feels like more like a one-man project here that was rushed out for the sake of having more music out there, rather than something made because there was like an actual reason to make it. Considering Plastic Beach's recent release, along with how much better that album is compared to this one, The Fall became overshadowed rather quickly, and as a result of that, is often forgotten by many Gorillaz fans. And there are a few quality moments on this thing, but it's very uninteresting overall, and it's pretty understandable why it's at times forgotten. It's not awful, but very unnecessary and uninteresting, excluding a couple tracks. Next up, I have Humanz, the band's 2017 return. This is a project that I think is decent, but nothing special really. There are some fantastic cuts like Strobe Light, Saturn's Bars, Let Me Out, and many more. And in fact, many of these stronger cuts display the band continuing to explore the hip-hop sound that they have explored in the past before, and there are occasional tracks on here like Saturn's Bars and Strobe Light that explore some new territory for the group. But at the same time, there are some really weak cuts on this project, like the droning Hallelujah Money, or just the completely aimless Sex Murder Party, which is still one of the most directionless songs that I've heard in recent years. Furthermore, all its features and the lack of presence from the actual band itself on this thing makes Humanz feel more like a compilation of a bunch of artists that Damon Albarn happened to really like, and where he occasionally features here. It just doesn't really feel like an actual Gorillaz album. In the fictional band's universe, I'm not even sure if Noodle played on this project. Like, she's in the videos and she's in the artwork and all that, but the guitar doesn't really have a powerful presence on this album. Something like this works conceptually on a project like Plastic Beach, but it doesn't really work on Humanz, and its concept really doesn't indicate to me that there should be a lack of guitars. Outside the music itself, even the artwork and videos associated with this era of the group feel a lot less interesting and passionate compared to the previous eras that this group was releasing music in. Though I will say that I did really enjoy the Saturn's Bars music video. That was a pretty cool one. With the lack of the Gorillaz' presence on this thing, as well as a handful of weak cuts or just more forgettable cuts, Humanz doesn't make for an album that I really want to return to, at least as a whole. I do return to some of the album's strongest cuts individually, but the album as a whole, not so much. Still a decent project, just not one of Gorillaz' finest. Next up, we have the newest addition to the Gorillaz discography, the Now Now. This project basically sounds like a better version of The Fall. Like that album, the Now Now lacks features and focuses more on a single sound. However, unlike The Fall, the Now Now features a much more interesting selection of songs, and more importantly, doesn't feel like a footnote in the band's career. The Now Now features the band playing around with genres like funk, new wave, as well as the alternative rock and hip-hop typically implemented into the band's sound. Tracks like Humility and Kansas display a laid-back sound that I just really enjoy when it's done right. They're pretty simple tracks, but they never cross the line of being boring for the most part. Hollywood features some of the signature hip-hop influence while also incorporating a fun, funky beat. This isn't a perfect album, however. There are some moments where I feel like maybe there needs to be a little bit more going on in terms of interesting ideas. There are some moments on here that are just lacking a little bit. Maybe they need a little bit more flavor or something along those lines. For example, some cuts like Trans just end up feeling okay in the grand scheme of the album. Not a bad song, but a little bland compared to some of the album's strongest moments. And while I don't feel like it's a bad track on its own, Idaho feels a little out of place in the rest of the track list with its more organic sound that, while still laid back, doesn't mesh very well with the slicker electronic influences that often pop up on the rest of this project. I still enjoy this project overall, however. It's a solid project and it's worth a listen in my opinion. Next is the self-titled album. Now, while its placement on this list probably wouldn't surprise a lot of you people watching who are familiar with the group, my opinion overall on this album is a bit unconventional to say the least. Truth be told, I don't think that this album is all that much better than the Now Now. Many will probably disagree and say this album is closer to the quality of Plastic Beach and Demon Days, but personally, I disagree. I want to make it clear, though, that I don't think that this is a bad album. It just has some flaws that bug me, to be honest. It's clearly a debut project, considering Gorillaz seem to be trying to really find their sound on this project. The nice blend of rock, hip-hop, and other genres that made Gorillaz music really interesting hasn't been perfected here, to be honest. Some tracks have a more straightforward alternative rock sound, while others attempt to mix other genres with mixed results. While I like tracks like Clint Eastwood and Rock the House, the fact that they're some of the only moments on this project where hip-hop really takes the forefront makes them stick out a bit, and not really in a good way. The same could be said for tracks like Latin Simone and 19-2000, which are some of the more experimental cuts on this thing that unfortunately don't mix well with the rest of the project. Essentially, while the experimentation and genre exploration that Gorillaz is known for is present on this project, it's not integrated as well as it is in projects like Demon Days and Plastic Beach. Also, I really just can't stand the track Soundcheck. I just find the vocals really annoying on the song for some reason. It's the only track on the album I can't stand, to be completely honest. Sorry to any fans of that song, but yeah, that's just how I feel about it. However, while this album has its lows for sure, its highs are very high. While I don't think they fit in very nicely into the album's flow, Clint Eastwood and Rock the House are cuts that are still fun to come back to and listen to again to this day. Soundcheck and M1A1 have a very eerie vibe that compels me to want to return to them for many repeated listens, while tracks like Tomorrow Comes Today, Starshine, and Slow Country display the more typical Gorillaz sound while still managing to sound like some of the best offerings from this project. 5/4 and Punk also managed to sound much more energetic than most Gorillaz tracks, yet still fit in nicely with most of the rest of this album. I actually wish that the group decided to make some more tracks like this following this project, considering that nowadays we don't really get many energetic Gorillaz songs unless the featured artist happens to be one that brings a lot of energy. And at the end of the day, this is a good album that I thoroughly enjoy. I'm not as in love with the project as some people are, and I often find myself returning to some of the individual tracks more than I do returning to this thing as a whole, but it's a solid start to this band's career, and it is very much worth a listen. Next up is Plastic Beach. I really love this album, guys. The mixing of genres that Gorillaz does so excellently is on full display here, as the group manages to mix rock, hip-hop, electronic, R&B, and many other sounds effortlessly. You'll have tracks like Stylo, which feature an electronic-tinged instrumental, a feature from legendary soul singer Bobby Womack, a feature from rapper Mos Def, as well as the typical singing you'd expect from 2D. Or the track Sweepstakes, for example, which once again features Mos Def initially rapping over another electronic-sounding beat before the hypnotic brass ensemble joins in, and the beat slowly begins to gain a more organic feel. It's just really interesting, to be completely honest. I can go on breaking down these tracks, one by one, but essentially, Plastic Beach is a very diverse yet focused project. Not all the tracks are this complex, however. Sometimes you'll get more simple tracks like On Melancholy Hill and Broken, for example, that are simpler in execution, but still manage to be great songs. In fact, those are two of my favorite in the entire track listing, in part due to their simplicity. I also love how the album works in the concept of fakeness and artificiality. Gorillaz move away from the rock influences clearly present on their first two albums, choosing more electronics this time around. The synthetic instrumentation, mixed with many of the lyrics tying back to the theme of artificiality and fakeness itself, creates a pretty interesting concept album that isn't necessarily strictly told through the lyrics. Despite the many features this album packs into its runtime, they never managed to steal the spotlight like on some other Gorillaz projects. The band themselves, or at least Murdoch, 2D, and a Cyborg Noodle, are all clearly present here on this album. Heck, the large amount of features can even be explained as the fictional band trying to compensate for the loss of Noodle and Russell, which I think is pretty clever. Overall, Plastic Beach is a fantastic album. Great songs, great mix of sounds, great features, well-executed concept. This album is Gorillaz doing what they do best, but it's not quite their best project. Because that would be Demon Days, as some of you have probably figured out by this point. Demon Days is actually not just my favorite Gorillaz album, but it's also one of my favorite albums of all time. It amazes me how many different styles of music are mixed together into this project, and how it still manages to sound so cohesive despite this. There are elements of rock, hip-hop, pop, electronic, gospel, and even spoken word music spread across this album's track list. And it all comes together just so perfectly. I don't understand how they were able to do it, but they did it. Tracks like El Mañana and Every Planet We Reach Is Dead showcase the group executing their alternative rock sound excellently, in peak form perhaps, with melancholy atmospheres and a focus on the guitar. And despite the guitar work on this album not being a marvel, technically speaking, it's performed masterfully throughout, and it demonstrates how you don't need to be playing at the speed of light or with some crazy and complexity to have interesting and compelling guitar parts. On the other hand, tracks like Feel Good Incorporated and November Has Come feature phenomenal features from hip-hop artists De La Soul and MF Doom respectively, and the overall collection of hip-hop artists brought onto this album provides some stellar verses that really add to the personality of this record. You then have the track Dare that mixes in poppier elements to create one of the most upbeat cuts on the album that's also extremely infectious and catchy. Fire Coming Out of the Monkey's Head features spoken word passages that help create a sort of apocalyptic atmosphere, I guess you could say, for the track that is only further cemented by 2D's sung hook that is similarly apocalyptic and depressing. I could spend a long time diving into each track here on this album, just talking about what makes each one great and unique and special and worth listen, but like all the entries in this countdown, I want to keep my thoughts pretty brief. I'll just sum up my thoughts on this project by saying it's a masterpiece. It tries so many things and excels at all of them while remaining coherent, which is rather amazing, to be honest. Definitely a 10 out of 10 album and a must listen in my opinion. Well, that was my list, guys, of the, at least in my own opinion, worst to best Gorillaz albums. And I do want to stress again that it is just my own personal opinion. It's perfectly okay if you have a different list, a different ranking for these albums, or even if you happen to agree with the list but have different reasonings as to why. It's perfectly fine. In fact, feel free to leave all that stuff in the comment section down below. I greatly appreciate seeing other people's takes on this subject, because I know the Gorillaz are a pretty interesting group. Their albums tend to sound different, so I feel like different people, depending on what type of music you like and things like that, will have different opinions that are all perfectly valid. I like to see why people feel the way they do, so comment down below your thoughts on that. I greatly appreciate it. And while you're down there, also make sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel for more music related content, more countdown lists like this one, as well as album reviews, track reviews, discussion videos, all that good stuff. So if you like that type of content, make sure you subscribe. Thanks for watching, guys, and stay golden.